The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
On this week's show, we welcome back United States Congressman Dan Meuser of the 9th Congressional District. Dan was re-elected in 2020 to a second term. You may remember in 2011, Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett nominated Dan to serve as Pennsylvania's Secretary of Revenue. While there, Dan significantly reformed the department to increase efficiencies. Dan's leadership was recognized by the Council on State Taxation for having the most dramatic improvement of any Department of Revenue in the country. In Congress, Dan serves on a couple of very important committees, that being Small Business and Foreign Affairs. Also very importantly, Dan serves on the Border Security Caucus, as well as a bipartisan caucus known as the Problem Solvers Caucus. That caucus is comprised of 58 congressmen as well as several senators. They are evenly divided on those caucuses between Republicans and Democrats. We will be discussing this week the crisis at the border, which has engulfed the Biden administration in controversy and recrimination. It's very important to note, one of the reasons we've had Dan back, since he was just on this show a few weeks ago to talk about the border, is he just got back from a fact-finding tour of congressmen. He was just at the border a week or so ago and saw firsthand the catastrophe we have in this country simmering at the border. Beside that, we will also discuss the $2.3 trillion infrastructure bill, which has encountered significant pushback from Republicans and Democrats alike.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Dan, welcome back to the Volpe Report.
Great to be with you, Chuck. Thank you.
So you've just come back from the border. You did an eyewitness tour. So that's why I wanted you back, because you have something special to talk about. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Take up wherever you went. Tell us how you ended up at the border last week again, and what brought you there, and more importantly, what you saw when you got there.
Sure, yeah, and as you mentioned, I was there about a year and a half ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, and it was not in the best of situations at that point. 6 months later, though, or less, after that, it was enormously corrected, primarily because we had such cooperation with Mexico and the so-called Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. But this time, it was absolutely far worse. I took my border trip with a group of the Problem Solvers Caucus that I'm on, so it was part Republicans and part Democrats, which I like going on a trip with them because we all see the same thing.
Right.
So you got to come away with the same conclusion.
Let me just interrupt real quick. I want you to continue. This is great stuff, but I want you to continue. I understand it, and we've talked about it, but for the viewers that may not understand, that's kind of a term of art in this starkly divided partisan country. A Problem Solvers Caucus made up of, my understanding, Democrats and Republicans, right. 29 each. Right. So talk a little bit about the the Solving Caucus, and then how you got on it, and then we'll go back to the border.
Well, I got invited to be on, which you need to, and they try to find reasonable people who could be staunch conservatives, as in some cases I am. I'm a conservative, but I also don't make perfect the enemy of good, or the other way around, good, right. The enemy of perfect. We agree, we find common ground, and we meet actually once a week, and we truly find common ground on what we can get done. As a matter of fact, jumping ahead here, we have a new transportation infrastructure report, which we didn't put a number on it as far as a cost, right. But it's somewhere in the neighborhood of half of right. what the Biden plan was. It's even less than half because it's focused on transportation, infrastructure, and revitalization. Right. It's something that I was sure to bring in because Pennsylvania, many cities around the country need revitalization in sure. our stressed cities. So it's really a terrific group. I'm very happy to be part of it.
29 each, Democrats?
29 each. And now we've actually
29 ours, 29 each.
29, right. And we've made it bicameral now. So we now have, we work with the Senate as well. So we have Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. So it's really a call it compromising, but it's a way to get, you don't bend your principles, and no one would really want you to, because then they don't want you there. But what we do is we work to come together and come up with solutions, i.e. problem solve. So we took this trip together, and it definitely brings you close too. You know, we eat tacos and we had all our Mexican dinner and everything else while we were there, Tex-Mex. But it was a very serious trip. Soon as we, first day, after hearing from the police force we had dinner with and some local judges and some local business owners of the serious problems that are facing those border cities. We were in McAllen, by the way, southern end of Texas. The first thing they showed us that next morning was the drugs coming through. And there's a lot of problems here, serious problems. And the reason that this has occurred, and there's really no way of describing this differently, is because of the policy shifts in the Biden administration.
Right.
They removed the Remain in Mexico for asylum. So we're getting people that can claim asylum, can just say, I want asylum. Now they're being processed in the United States, and because the processing line is so long, they are then engaged in what's called catch and release. All right, we set an asylum hearing for you in a year and a half. Tell us what city you're going to be in, and then you are expected to show up. Well,
and then they don't.
Well, believe it or not, there's a reason for this. About 50% show up, but 50% don't.
Right.
So it's truly release and goodbye.
Right.
But they show up to give it a shot, right? Because then they can actually get asylum. Right. But what happens is, what they don't tell you, 50% show up, but those that get denied asylum in that processing, none of them show up afterwards.
Right. They get released.
They just don't show up if they get denied. They say, you got 24 hours to go get your things in order.
And then they're gone.
Right. So when they know of something like that, that is a message, a wrong message, telling those that, hey, I was about to say Pennsylvania's open, the United States is open. And that's the message that the cartels, when they hear this, along with that policy shift, the messaging from the White House has been the disaster. And every Customs and Border Patrol agent tells you the same thing. They think the cartels are telling them, the mules are telling them that now's the time to come. The House just passed amnesty, which they did in the House. It won't go through the Senate. And the President Biden is welcoming you in. And they also changed something so undocumented children just get a complete pass-through. They don't even have to claim an asylum, or excuse me, not undocumented, unaccompanied minors. Yeah, so those things taking place, then the cartels get hold of this. They use the people as distractions. They charge them everything they can. Those who are the happiest about this are certainly the drug dealers. And folks, this is no exaggeration. Again, every CBP member will tell you the same thing. The level of drugs coming through, let's put it this way, fentanyl, the very, very addictive and deadly, up over 2,000% just in the last several months. So they showed it to us. We looked at all the different drugs that they were bringing. So you have that, and I'll tell you some other horrible stories. When they're coming across the Rio Grande, as many do, they come in different rafts, and they'll put people and families and kids in a couple of rafts, and they'll bring some kids in their drug raft. So they use that and hope that the Customs and Border Patrol goes after the people as opposed to the drugs. But if they come after that particular raft, you know what they do with the kids that are on the raft? They throw them in the water. They throw them in the water. So the patrol has to go pick up the kids. And,
if they don't drown first.
If they don't drown first.
Comment, Dan, just a couple of points. You made a couple of buzzwords for me that I'd like to kind of get into a little bit here. And you mentioned the issue of the lack of deterrence. And in fact, they're encouraging. And to support your position, actually, I've done my research. One of your colleagues, United States Congressman Michael McCall, who I know you know, has criticized the Biden administration's rollback of former President Trump's policies, including the, quote, Remain in Mexico protocol, which you've referred to, which forced migrants to stay in Mexico while waiting for their asylum cases to be heard. And then he said the bottom line was that if they're not going to be effectively caught and released into America, his quote was, deterrence does work at stopping the influx of migrants at the border. Now, our Democratic, appointed in the cabinet by President Biden, a Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, here's his response to McCall, how we need deterrence at the border. Here's what he said, quote, his exact quote. Mayorkas pushed back, quoting, "Sometimes the tool of deterrence defies the values and principles for which we all stand." What the heck? Can you, I don't understand it.
That is liberal rationalization, and no offense to any liberals out there, but this is hyper-liberalism that this radical left is trying to run. And I say that as a reasonable guy. Right? I mean, of course I can work with Democrats. Right. I can work with anyone whose goals are to secure America for our families, for our businesses, and for prosperity, and do the right thing by the rest of the world. But what they're doing here is they're attracting these poor people to our country, saying it's okay to come in when they find out that they're being robbed and raped, by the way, by the cartels and the mules, and the danger coming across, and then they're put in detention centers. That's, we were at the Donna detention facility.
Most recently.
Most recently, all right? And I was there actually once before. It was far less crowded. It was cleaner. To put it this way, in what they call pods, jails, rooms, whatever you want to call them, there were about 60 to 70 kids, as opposed to the limit is supposed to be 15. Now this is the day and age of COVID. None of them are getting tested, by the way. They're all in this, and they try to let them out an hour a day. And on the same note, the CBP is doing its absolute very best. And by the way, remember under Trump, when they would say, oh, they were in there for longer than 3 days, that's a violation of law? The average time that they're in these pods, 23 days. 23 days.
Under the Biden administration.
Currently, under the Biden administration. So a real mess, but it's another sign, it's a serious one, that truly needs corrections, and the corrections are there. Right? You got the Vice President, Kamala Harris, saying how next week she's got a virtual Zoom call with the Vice President of Guatemala. I mean, give me a break. First of all, Guatemala doesn't want the people leaving. We need engagement. We need cooperation. They'll be glad to secure the borders.
Has she been to the border?
She has not been to the border. The president nor the vice president have not been to the border.
And the president appointed her to put her, quote, the point person for the crisis at the border, and yet she hasn't even been there.
She'd come away with the same information that I came away with, and perhaps they would actually do something about it instead of just trying to reverse policies from the Trump administration for better or for worse. What does that mean? It really doesn't make sense. But this is part of the 100 days, right? We're at the 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration, or the Harris-Biden administration, whichever way you look at it.
There's a fair debate on that.
These executive orders. Day one, I was at the inauguration. Sat there, listened, unity, bipartisanship. We're going to work together. Okay? Under the Obama administration, it took me a term before I stopped listening to what he had to say and just looked at his actions. 100 days in, I don't even, what they say and what they do is so much in conflict and opposite. I only look to see what their actions are already 100 days in. Because with the executive orders, the bills that come across that are completely
50 plus
partisan,
1. There's hasn't been much unity. There's no doubt.
And so much else. The inviting of Republicans for any input whatsoever just is not happening.
Two other things based on what you've said, Congressman. You talked about the cartels and the mules and how they're getting people across. Well, my crack staff has found another, I think, important story, and I like your comment on it. That apparently, in this article by Adam Shaw, the border cartels are using TikTok and social media to recruit American teenagers to smuggle migrants for cash. So I'm going to read the article. Cartels at the southern border are targeting American teenagers on social media to get them to do their dirty work of smuggling illegal immigrants to the United States. On images obtained by Fox News, cartels are using social media apps like TikTok, where they offer more than $3,000 cash a ride for for teens and young adults to come drive smuggled migrants into the United States. And when they reach the border, they get through the checkpoint. They drop them off at a location that the cartel gives them, mostly store parking lots, where the migrants are then picked up by someone trusted by the cartel and transferred to stash houses scattered along the border. So again, to your point, this is going on.
They're promoting human trafficking. Even some CBP, that'll go nameless, stated to me that sometimes they feel like they are the last link in the human trafficking chain, because when the kids are coming across, the unaccompanied minors, very often they have a phone number written on their arm or an address.
Wow.
So they're calling that number, they're using it, they're trying to track where they might be going, but they don't know necessarily if that's a safe guardian, if that's the parent, if that's a family member. They do their best. But when you have tens of thousands coming across a month, what literally is you supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you what the governor of Arizona did. The governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, what he did, and I'm quoting from him, he deployed the National Guard. And here's what the governor of Arizona said, quote, "The situation in our border communities is just as bad, if not worse, than the coverage we've been seeing. Deployment of the National Guard is critical to dealing with this crisis, and we are actively engaged in planning with the National Guard." On Tuesday, a week ago, Governor Ducey again criticized the Biden administration's handling of the border surge, accusing it of inaction. Quote from the governor, "It's become evidently clear that Arizona needs the National Guard, and the White House is aware of that. Yet to this day, there has been no action from this administration, the Biden administration, and it doesn't look like they're going to act anytime soon. If this administration isn't going to do anything, then we will." So,
Well, they need the National Guard there. They were there when I was there from different, well, these were Texas National Guards.
Right.
But, just on that TikTok issue, think of what's going on with social media as well and how this is being permitted. My daughter actually last night showed me how a conservative video person who does blogs or whatever was taken off of TikTok, and only because she was speaking probably like I'm speaking right now, conservative views, if you will, Republican views, removed from TikTok. Yet something like that, attracting those to come in and help in human trafficking, is permissible? See, these are just, look, we all live together. This is the USA, right? We got to be America, not Republican, not Democrat, an America issue.
We'll come back after a view. You're going to see a view that aired on Fox News, my view, dealing with the issue of race and voter identification. And you'll hear my comments on that, and I think the view speaks for itself. So hopefully you'll hear the view, and then we'll be back with Congressman Dan Meuser after that view is aired. Thank you.
Following Volpe's Views is a paid political program and is not endorsed by the station, management, or staff.
The issue of voter identification has been a hot-button topic in the country the past several weeks, as a number of states, including Georgia, have passed laws to require voters to have ID in order to vote. Of course, this was met with the banshee howl from the far left wing of the Democratic Party, including President Joe Biden, that likened the development to the Jim Crow laws that segregated the South after Reconstruction and well into the 20th century. This is an outrage, and I'm not talking about the voter ID laws. I'm talking about the racist and pejorative far left and our president. Every African American and all people of color in this country should be outraged by the implicit suggestion by the Democrats that they are not capable or sophisticated enough to fill out a basic ID card, the same type of IDs that are required to buy alcohol, open a checking account, rent a car, check into a hotel room, or get on an airplane. Thankfully, 8 African American United States congressmen stood up last week and said exactly that. The congressmen were all members of the United States House of Representatives and included Burgess Owens, Robert Woodson, Jennifer Carroll, Ken Blackwell, Raynor Jackson, George Farrell, James Wright, and Michael Murphy. I will now be quoting exactly their excerpts which appeared in their op-ed column. Begin quotes. America is a country of over 300 million people. We are comprised of every shape, size, nationality, and opinion. This diversity has proven to be one of our greatest strengths. According to liberal orthodoxy, all blacks think alike, and that all blacks oppose voter ID. To the contrary, a recent Rasmussen Report poll found that 69% of blacks and 82% of non-white minorities support voter ID. Blacks know the value of the right to vote. We struggled to win that right in a country that for too long treated us as second-class citizens. We shed our blood so we could partake in American elections just like every other American citizen. Why then do opportunistic activists like Stacey Abrams pretend the entire black community stands behind them and the radical Democratic Party? Why do they pretend that black people are either opposed to voter ID or, even more offensively, that blacks are incapable of obtaining IDs? The answer is, in part, because the elites, most of whom are white, have enabled them. These elites are totally oblivious to real black leaders, such as civil rights legend Richard Finley, younger leaders like Wall Street wizard John Burnett, National Black Chamber of Commerce founders Harry and Kay Alford, and football legend Herschel Walker. If corporate America wants to be truly woke, they must wake up to the fact that activists like Stacey Abrams absolutely do not represent the black community. They represent the interests of white elites. To add insult to this patronizing injury, if every other ethnicity is required to show an ID to vote, why is the black race considered incapable of doing so? This notion is absolutely insulting. End quote. I couldn't have said it better myself. Welcome back. Again, we're here today with United States Congressman from the 9th Congressional District, Dan Meuser. Now, Dan, we've talked at length about your visit to the border and the very important issue of, well, it's a crisis, a national crisis that we're dealing with in immigration now. But we're going to kind of do a pivot here to talk about something else. There is a lot of pushback on the $2+ trillion infrastructure bill that the president is promoting. And by pushback, the Republican view seems to be, and I'm going to get your comments, that this bill is so weighed down with, we'll call it tie-ins to effectively the green dream, as it was referred to by Nancy Pelosi herself, tying this infrastructure bill to all these Green Deal components, that you don't get the infrastructure money unless you agree to do it this way or that way or certain way, which almost takes back a lot of the great job creation that it has. Well, of course, there's been some pushback. United States Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina has initiated a bill from the Senate. You and your problem-solving caucus are dead on this problem, and you guys are working on language for your response, and this is bipartisan, which is encouraging. So talk about your view of it and what you guys have talked about in the problem-solver caucus in the House of Representatives.
Well, what we want is a transportation infrastructure, and as I said earlier, a revitalization bill that gets the job done and provides to the states the funds that we need to modernize our rails, our roads, our bridges, to work on the things that, excuse me, are in line with what the needs are and where return on investment will come. We do need to bring private sector dollars into it. I've introduced something called the Infrastructure Bank of America. There are smart ways of doing this, and I'm all for a transportation infrastructure bill. But think about these numbers. Pennsylvania is now the 5th largest state. We just lost. We saw the census
by population,
come out.
yeah.
Right. All right. If we got $20 billion, if every state got $20 billion, well, that's $1 trillion. But every state shouldn't, because we're the 5th largest.
Right.
So if you just do the math on that, that works out to be about $600 billion. Pennsylvania could take that $20 billion, issue bonds with half of it, and we would have in the neighborhood of $60 to $70 billion to modernize our roads and highways.
Right.
All right, if it was financially managed properly. Right. Our budget per year is less than $3 billion for all of our transportation needs. That's a huge amount of money. Right. And yet they're talking about this craziness of $2.3 trillion, and as you stated, most of it is this Green New Deal energy plans, right, where I mentioned earlier one big problem with that is most of the green energy they're talking about is actually made in China. So that's a little bit of a, you can't make this stuff up, right? $400 million or $1 billion, excuse me, for Medicaid expansion. I mean, they're putting everything associated with infrastructure. And I saw a meme the other day. It was the Dos Equis guy, and he says, I don't always drink beer, but when I do, it's infrastructure. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do here. So there's a smart way to do this. One of the biggest problems, you mentioned it's a Trojan horse to an extent, is the taxes. The part here that is a lot of it's dangerous. Because let's face it, we're seeing inflation taking place. We're seeing spending that is wild. We're seeing China licking its chops at the idea that we're going to now raise taxes and spend ourselves into oblivion where we could lose the dollar as the reserve currency, which is something that I don't know why liberals don't understand is possible.
Dan, there's a move in Europe right now, in the European Union. The dollar right now in the United States is the form of currency for oil prices, is based on the U.S. dollar. They're trying to take it down and use the euro to replace it because of the devalued United States American dollar. People have to understand this stuff.
Right. If you increase the cost of doing business, those businesses will move. Unfortunately, many of our top big corporations work in a global way, not an America First way. So what you have to do is we need the most competitive tax rates possible. And that's what the Trump administration did, brought the corporate net down to 21%. But the whole world got competitive. You know, you have Biden saying, oh God, in the 50s the taxes were higher. Yeah, Mr. President, but the rest of the world, Ireland's corporate net income tax is 12%. So that's why businesses want to incorporate there and pay those taxes there and pay nothing here. So what they're doing is not smart. It won't help repatriation. It won't help bring those manufactured jobs that they talked about back from China. And then on small business, they're looking to remove what worked out to be about a 20% reduction in small business taxes. You do people. That's why we had a 3% unemployment rate.
Of course,
because they were hiring. And then there's capital gains. There's all kinds of other things that are just going to be damaging to our economy. And to Pennsylvania, we need to model ourselves after the leading states on a national level. We need to be more competitive than the rest of the world. Then we get an economic boom.
Of course. Well stated, Dan. And you know, here's some of the contradiction, hypocrisy from the far leftist wing of the Democratic Party. They're so concerned about our future generations for climate change. God forbid our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, future generations, you know, are going to be devastated by climate catastrophes because of climate change, and yet they'll think nothing about strapping those same future generations with hundreds of billions and trillions in taxes. Those chickens come home to roost. You can't keep spending into trillions and kicking it down the road. Do you know the economic devastation there's going to be in this country? And again, back to the hypocrisy. It's okay, we got to protect our climate for the future generations, but if they have no quality of life because they have no money because they're going to be taxed to death, that apparently is okay. It's offensive.
Yeah, it is. And it's the heavy-handed government that's causing this. Look, I'm all for a greener, so-called greener planet, right? We're conservationists, we're environmentalists, let's do it. Let the private sector do it. It's been doing it pretty well. Have some regulations that are reasonable, right? Of course we do, on various pollutant controls, but things have to be done in a measured way. You know, the U.S., largely because of natural gas, but many of the other things that we've done, is the only industrialized nation that has reduced our carbon emissions for the last 3 years in a row, and that's going to continue.
Believe it or not, Dan, we're out of time. Thank you so much for making time. I know how busy your schedule is, and your bird's eye view of what's going on at the border is priceless for our viewers to hear from someone who's been there. So thank you.
Thank you, Chuck.
Again, we were here today with United States Congressman Dan Meuser of the 9th Congressional District, and we heard a lot of him about a hope for bipartisanship in Congress with their problem-solving caucus, which is so important for our country. We also heard about the continuing crisis at the border, and we need to be aware of that. We'll be back next week with a special guest, Dr. Justin Mattis, who is a scientist, PhD. He was on the show a year ago, and we're going to get into a little bit back to COVID-19 and some of the issues we're facing as a country. We'll see you next week at 11:30.